Ladies and gentlemen, we are back once more to conduct more science. In today's mission, we are going to traverse the great deep sea of interplanetary space and travel forth to visit Jool, the only current gas giant. We are going to launch Galileo this mission to get there, but before we do that, a couple more things. You may have noticed that I've actually changed my mission flag. We've been using the NASA one for a while, but hey, I'm sort of an artist, so I figured I would draw one of my own. This is actually, hold on. It's actually based off of a character I've designed. He's this little green alien squirrel character who I might be using as a mascot from here on out. So that might be kind of fun to do. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's see, that was 4, I believe. We had 4 of these. Let's see, well, I can just hit the undo button by doing Control-Z, and that'll put it back to where it's supposed to go. There we go. So, one more thing before we leave. There was actually a new thing that I've discovered that will help us. We have a lot of science missions here, and it's actually going to take a really long time to try to have, like, right-click them one at a time to make them all go, and we can lose track of things. So, I've discovered this new system that we can use called action mapping, or action groups. If we go to the top of the screen, left of the Galileo sign, we can click Action Groups. And Action Groups assign different actions to a button on your keyboard. For example, the custom ones on the far left, custom 1 through 10, those are actually the numbers 1 through 10 on your keyboard. And on those, I've assigned different numbers to do different things. One, for example, I've designed to deploy the solar panels. I figure the most important part of your machine is receiving power, because if you lose power while you're up in space, you won't be able to do anything. So priority alpha is doing solar panels. Number 2, we'll extend all of our Communitron, our antenna outward. I don't think we need to do that, but I think it looks kind of cool, and it might be useful to have those antennas deployed and ready to go, because I think if they're deployed and ready, then it doesn't take as much time, like once you tell it to do a science mission, it doesn't take as much time to do. Number 3, speaking of which, is the most important one here. Or not the most important, but probably the most action-heavy. Over on the left here for the customs, every single one of these missions is a single science project. So if I were to hit number 3, all of these science modules here would simultaneously conduct all the science that they have on board. They won't automatically transmit them. I still have to go through them one at a time once they conduct all the missions, but it's much easier than right-clicking and finding them, and a lot of mine are actually buried underneath all these parachutes and thrust fuel tanks, so it'll be a little bit easier. And I'll show you how to set that up real briefly. I'll do a custom for 4. I'm not going to use this at all, but let's say if we click custom 4, or any other custom number for that button. All you have to do is click any one of these devices on your ship that can do a thing. Let's say if I wanted to make it do a thermometer experiment. I click one of our thermometers. You'll notice on the left that a selection comes up. I can either set it to toggle the display, log the temperature, or delete the data. If I click log temperature, and then if I were to later on press 4, it would immediately give me the temperature, and we could treat it as like a science finding. I'm not going to do that because we've already got that assigned to 3, but that's how you more or less would do that. If you did want to do it, you would click log temperature, and then if I pressed 4, it would do it in the actual practice. So, that's everything that I want to do. From here on out, we are going nowhere but Jool. So, let's hit the road. So, ladies and gentlemen, you get to see this big, massive system fire in action. Oh, actually, hold on. I realize that I almost took Jebediah Kerbin with me. I don't want to do that, because if we did do that, he would have no way back to the planet. So I'm briefly going to do one more thing. I'm going to show you how to get rid of the Kerbals that you've put inside of your craft. Next to the action groups, there is a button called Crew. And you'll notice that if I don't do anything, Jebediah will automatically be assigned to this craft. Specifically, he'll be placed inside of the command module, this sort of room with a hatch. So if I grab him by the name and drag him over to the available crew, now there are no Kerbals aboard this craft. So we can safely send it to Jool and not have to worry about losing any of our astronauts. Okay, now we're ready to go. And since this is a brand new launch system, I'm going to show you the step by step. First thing you want to do is hit the T button to stabilize ourselves. Let us throttle up before launching by holding the shift key until the throttle goes all the way up. Actually, you don't want it to go all the way up, I realize that actually. You want it to only be about 95%. You might be wondering why we don't want to go a full 100, and that's because of the bottom main thruster. We're giving it a lot of power to thrust, and if we set it at full throttle, it'll actually start to overheat. But if we do it at just slightly less than full throttle, then we won't have to worry about that issue. Anyway, we should be all set to go from here. So, when I press the spacebar, we will begin our journey into space. Fitting, actually. I'm going to begin. 3, 2, 1, ignition. And here we go! This is probably the most powerful machine we've ever set up. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, if we actually were to carry this as far as we could probably leave the solar system with this thing. Oh, we're starting to overheat on the main thruster. I'm going to throttle down a little bit. And that seems to be working, actually. So I'm going to keep it at about that level for now, because we don't need to use all of our fuel at once, because we already have a ton of power. This might actually be a little bit too much power, but, you know, more power is better power. Alright, so we're almost at the stage where our first little boosters at the bottom are starting to run out of power. These are the ones that I've highlighted right here. Once they run out of power, I'm temporarily going to throttle all the way up, just to give ourselves that extra boost of power. So we're not going to stay throttled up. I'm going to do that now. They have run out, so I'm going to abandon them quickly. And now I'm going to quickly get a throttle back down to about 90% or less, so that our overheat starts to go down. We're still going to be accelerating though, so if we don't have to worry about losing any power on the way up. By the way, at this point, you don't, this is pretty handy to have. I'm going to click the top right resources button so that system stays there. I'm going to turn on our engineering system. There we go, just to give you guys a little bit more info on what's happening as we're ascending. We're going to use the same procedures as before. When we hit about 10 kilometers and are going faster than 200 meters per second, we're going to do our maneuver to put ourselves into an orbit. Actually, I'll probably start slowly maneuvering before we hit 200, because it looks like we're going to get 10K first. Okay, here we go, starting to do the turn. When it hits 200, I'm going to do a full 45-degree turn. And it might seem that it's being a little bit slow, but don't worry, have patience. This is a very powerful system. The farther we get up, the less resistance there is and the less fuel we have, so the faster we'll go. Exponentially faster if I were to let it. Okay, there we go. 200, gonna go all the way down to 45 degrees. In fact, we can probably even afford to go a little bit above 45, a little bit deeper than 45 degrees, a little bit steeper, if you will. Or shallower, rather. I'm going to take a look at my current map here. Looks like we are about 24 degrees, so not as powerful as it might seem, but believe me, this is pretty handy. We're getting close to losing our second stage, so once these run out, I'll again put ourselves at full throttle, and then launch with the main booster. Bear in mind that our main booster still has all of the fuel in it below the decoupler. So, let's see. About to run out, we're going to throttle up about now. Full throttle. Okay, those are expended, so let's release them. There we go. Now I'm going to throttle back down a little bit so that we stop overheating, because now we're putting all of our thrust on that one little engine down at the bottom. I'm going to give ourselves a steeper, a more shallow trajectory here. We're already at 45, and our fuel tank at the bottom is mostly full, so ideally we might even have it set so that we'll put ourselves in an orbit and still have the main central thruster. If we still have that and don't have to decouple it, then we know that we're in good shape. Here we go. About 100 on each side ought to do the trick just fine. We're getting pretty close now. The nice thing about these bigger thrusters is that it takes much less time to do the maneuvers that you want to do. The trade-off is that it also takes a long time to turn your craft. There we go! So now we're in a stable orbit around Kerbin. We're not going to be here for too long, but if you want to quick save at this point, you can. Since we're in an orbit that's not really going anywhere and we don't have any risk of falling back down to Kerbin, we can now do precision orbiting maneuver nodes at our leisure. Now again, our main focus for getting there is Jool. Jool is the target, so if we right-click it and select target, we'll be able to better understand how to get there. One trick I found useful is to start your maneuver node from the back side of the planet. So if I were to say start right here, and use the green button right here, not the one with the X in it. The X stands for retrograde. The circle with no X in it stands for prograde. Prograde meaning forward, and retrograde meaning that you're firing your engines backwards. Prograde speeds you up, retrograde slows you down. Or slows down your orbital momentum, more or less. And I notice that as I make an orbit on the outside of the Kerbal here, that we have the ascending and descending nodes, like how we were trying to get to Minbus, or Eve. Now, interplanetary trajectories are rather challenging, so it's more or less just trying to get there with the least amount of fuel that we have to burn possible. So one thing that we can do to help is match the tilt of the orbit. These upper and lower purple buttons right here, we can use those to slightly turn the, or rather tilt our orbit. So if I tilted it up like this, that might help us a tad. There we go. You'll notice that we have our closest approach and target at closest approach position set up. And if we can turn them so that the two meet together, that'll put us in Jool's sphere of influence. And the more I'm tilting the orbit, the closer we seem to be getting. So we're on the right track, I believe. Let's keep doing that. Keep it up. Keep it up. Okay, so doing this on its own is not enough to get us there. So we have to perform some other parts of our stage here too. This blue one, I believe, continues our, or rather adjusts our node here. And you'll probably want to play this for a little while because it actually is fairly tricky. Oh, there we go. So if we do a prograde burn forward, we do in fact get a Jool encounter. Now, I want to put us as close to Jool as possible without hitting it. Probably about 1 million kilometers or less is good. It's in the right ballpark. Alright, ladies and gents, we are going to give this a try here. I've set a node that will put us at least in a sphere of influence, and that might make it a little bit easier to set it up. Once we actually put ourselves in the trajectory we want to, we can do fine adjustments once we're there. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually put us on said trajectory. That will take about 28 minutes to reach. Oh my gosh, these long turns are terrible. While we're turning, let's talk a little bit about Jool. Now, Jool, as I understand it, is a green gas giant, and around the gas giant are 4 moons. The gas giant itself is the main part of our focus for this mission, and while we can send missions to the moons, I realize that it'll make a very, very big rocket with an extremely heavy payload if we try to do it all at once. So first I want to learn about the planet itself before we put anything on or orbiting the moons. Okay, here we go. There we go, right on the node. Let's go take a look back at our spaceship before we launch. We're still in orbit around Kerbin, by the way. I realize that we're in the dark, but this might be a good opportunity to turn on some of our lights. Now that we have colored lights, we have quite a fun little setup here. Our rocket is lit up like a Christmas tree. And even if we're not receiving energy from our solar panels, which we've already set up, we still do have energy coming from our RTGs. And we haven't really used any of that energy yet to do transmissions or anything, so we're still good. Basically, we've got a nice fancy rocket here for a setup. Now the burn, if I'm not mistaken, takes roughly 2 minutes with our current thrusting capabilities. So I'll probably want to thrust, I want to say about 1 minute and 15 seconds before we hit the T-minus node, or hit the trajectory, or like the time node to do this. So I'm going to speed up time just a tad bit. Okay, and go! We are now going to go full throttle. to put ourselves in that trajectory to get us to Jool. If we take a look outside of this map, our apoasis is slowly going to rise, which is handy. I don't think this lower stage here is going to make us all the way to Jool, and in fact, we're starting to overheat rather fast, actually, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. But we want to get as much fuel out of this as possible, so I'm going to zoom all the way out, keeping an eye on our apoasis. In fact, I'm actually going to swivel over to this side so that we can watch it grow from Jool's perspective. Whoa. We're starting to drift a little bit away from our node here, so I'm going to turn us. There we go. Our apoasis, there it goes. There's our apoasis. We are now in a in an orbit that's going to put us above the sun at the very least. So we've escaped Kerbin. We're getting close to the trajectory that we need. We're getting higher up. I'm going to come back down here because we're about to lose our lower thruster any second now. And there it goes. We're going to release the lower part and thrust. Oh my gosh! Is everything okay? It looks like it. Okay, let's keep going and hope that that didn't cause any problems. Because we're still thrusting at the very least. We're getting close to our Jool apoasis already, so as we approach... Wow, that shuddering speed is not very pleasant sounding. I hope nothing broke. Okay, I'm going to slow down on the throttle as we approach our position to Jool. I'm going to keep ourselves nice and slow down even more. Slow and steady now. Nice and slow. We don't want to burn too much of our fuel, and we want to make sure that we're nice and precise here. Getting close. I'm going to zoom in on Jool to keep an eye on a periapsis, which should be forming any second now. When it does, I'm going to let it get as close as it can, and when it starts to climb up again, I'm going to hit the X button. Oh, there we go. The stuttering stopped. Okay. Ready? Oh, nice. Okay, good. We don't want to do any more than that. So if we leave it alone as it is right now, we will arrive in Jool's sphere of influence. So we made it to Jool, technically, but now we want to be a little bit more precise. So, let's see. I'm going to try to put us on a trajectory. The first thing I want to do is put us on a trajectory that should allow us to hit Jool. Or rather, allow my lower lander to hit Jool. So now that we're on our way, I'm going to kill our maneuver node, because we don't need it anymore. Not where we're going. Let's allow Galileo to say pleasant dreams to Kerbin as we leave it forever. Okay. Let's actually take a look at how we're doing here. I'm going to go to our orbital map, and I'm going to speed things along so that we leave Kerbal's sphere of influence, or come close to leaving it. I'm going to speed it up super fast. Here we go. So we're almost out of Kerbal's sphere of influence. In fact, I'm just going to keep boosting until we are entirely out. Here we go. So now we are technically in an orbit around the sun, and if we wanted to, we could conduct some science now. But my higher priority is getting us to Jool, because once we get there, frankly, we should be perfectly able to conduct as much science as we want. And according to this, is going to take us 6 years to get there, so we have plenty of time to get us some science before we arrive. I'm going to quick save now that we've arrived in the orbit that we want. And I am, in fact, going to put ourselves back to our staging here. Or rather, back to our orbit map, because there's something I want to do. Now that we've arrived, I'm going to give ourselves a maneuver node. Or I plan to, anyway. Ah, there we go. Am I not able to do this right now? Hold on. Actually, I'm going to try something real quick. I realize that we might not even need to do all this fancy maneuvering when I can just maneuver our own, maneuver our own landing stage. So I'm going to quick save real quick, just to make sure that we don't screw up anything. I am going to go specifically to our landing node, or the one that our landing science experiment, the one that we're going to put inside of the atmosphere. And I'm going to decouple it, turn on RCS, thrust with the H key so that we thrust safely away from our current model right there. That should push us away from the mission, the main mission, in a safe way so that we can now adjust ourselves accordingly. So now the lander is officially on its own. So now all we have to do is put this on a trajectory that'll impact, and then this mission will be over until we actually get there. Then my final mission with this is going to be to try to put us a little bit closer, maybe about 1 million kilometers, or 1,000 kilometers rather, towards it. Okay, there we go. So what I'm going to try to do is take our lander here and aim us in the general direction of our node. I think we can actually do this pretty early on, as long as we're at the node itself. Then I'm just going to burn using our RCS, and that should be enough to get us there, I think. If not, I'll go back to my earlier quick save and return to the rocket and try to do the maneuver with our remaining larger mission. Okay, so I've got it aimed. Now all I want to do is go to Jool, stare at where our periapsis is, and turn on RCS with the R key, and then there we go. I'm going to get it to go down as low as I can make it go, holding the H key to use our RCS fuel. We can use all of it if we need to, of course, because this is going to be the only maneuver that we'll have to do with our lander. Once we do that, we should be all set to go. Although, if we ever see that number on the Jool periapsis start to go up, then we know we've gone too far and we'll have to let go and readjust. But so far, it looks like we're doing pretty good. Climbing low, there we go. Okay, there we go. So, we got that stage done. We're getting ourselves much, much closer. But now we need to do a slightly better job at this. So, again, this fight by far is probably the most annoying part, adjusting your orbits. By now, we've all but abandoned our Galileo lander, our other piece of the Galileo. This is its own mission at this point. In fact, I'm going to rename it. I'm going to rename it the Galileo Diver. It's going to be classified as a lander, but we'll call it a diver because it's designed to land in Jool and never return. In fact, we're more or less sending this machine on a suicide mission. This is crazy. Even the slightest adjustments will do this. This might not be the best way to go about putting ourselves into a stable position, actually. So I'm going to turn on... I'm going to press F5. Turn on RCS. Burn very slightly. Or press N very slightly, because it looks like that's actually putting us much closer to the surface. There. Now let me let go of R. That should be a trajectory that puts us right into Jool. Oh wait, no, hold on. First of all, I'm going to get rid of my node altogether, because I think that's tripping me up. There we go. There's no longer a node, and there's no longer a trajectory point, which means that that should put us right into Jool. So let me take a look here at our craft. I'm going to quick save before anything else happens, because I've been dealing with this problem for the last half hour, and I'm going crazy. We're upside down, but that's okay. It doesn't necessarily have to matter if we're correctly oriented in space. It is space, after all. Upside down is entirely relative. I'm going to throw up our landing gear now, just in case I forget. Well, actually, no. It's probably not a good idea to do that before we start to burn in the atmosphere, do a re-entry phase. I'm going to quick save. Now, I've already quick saved, so we should actually land there, but I'm actually going to slightly turn the craft, see if that changes our orientation even a little bit. Yeah, if you see that actually, doing slight turns with this craft actually seems to move our periapsis. Now we see how it's sort of not deciding whether or not to have one or not. That's a little frightening, actually, so... I have to remember that even the slightest... At this distance in our orbit, the slightest perturbations can greatly disrupt our trajectory. So I'm going to let it go until the periapsis stops moving entirely. Then we are going to leave this craft alone. I will leave it alone. But I will do one more thing to it. I'm going to set up an alarm by going to our alarm window, which is already open. If it weren't, and if you had this menu, you could click the Kerbal alarm button right here. I went to Kerbal alarm. I'm going to add an alarm. I've set it to go to an SOI change, which means a sphere of influence change. That means that it's going to notify us when we get within the sphere of influence of Jupiter. Specifically, I want it to do so within 5 minutes of us getting there. So I'm going to add that alarm. That way, we don't risk forgetting that we've launched this mission in the first place. So when we get to about this point where it says Jool encounter, or at the very least 5 minutes before that, it will stop the game and tell us that we're about to arrive. So there we go. Now this mission is all set. We can't leave it alone. The only thing I have to worry about it left, to be quite honest, is actually landing there. And when we approach the sphere of influence, I'm going to turn up the parachutes and do our science experiments. So for the sake of having achieved what we want to with this craft, I'm going to leave it alone. One more thing before we call this video a wrap. I want to put the other craft, the other one that we launched on, the one that has the 2 remaining missions on it, into the trajectory that I want it to have. That's going to be the Galileo lander, by the way. The diver is the one that we're going to send into Jupiter. The lander, on the other hand, or we're going to rename it because it's not going to be a lander, but an orbiter. We want to put in a trajectory that puts it within 1 million meters, or 1,000 kilometers. Now, by this point, we've already done so much thrusting with our landing piece that it's nowhere to be seen. It's traveled so far away from our original craft that it's not coming back to us. And that red glow is gone because that red glow is coming from the lander. Let us rename this the Galileo Orbiter. Or actually, no, we can do better than that. Galileo Station, because we have a module in here that houses a Kerbin. And if it's going to be orbiting a place, I'm going to call it Galileo Station. In fact, I'm going to take it another step further and rename it as a station right here. We're going to reclassify it as our first official space station, if it goes the way it's supposed to. The solar array is still gathering some light here, and actually, while we're in this trajectory, we can test out our components of this device. So if I press 2, our big antenna are going to open up, and if I were to press 3, all of our science missions that are left here would conduct at once. Like this, for example. Let's see, material study. We could conduct a material study, I suppose. Well, actually, no. Let's not do a material study. Those ones that we can't are the ones that we can't redo. Those, the material study is in the Science Juniors. We can't redo those after we do them, so I'm going to wait until we get into Jupiter. Gravity scans, however, are redoable, so I'm going to transmit that now. I'm going to turn on our electricity so that we can keep an eye on how much energy is being used here. That gave us about 88 science right away, actually. Let's see. This one, gravity scan, I believe we already did this, but we can give it another try. Ah, that one's only going to give us 3 science, but that's okay. And again, just keeping an eye on our electricity here. I don't think we're going to run out given what we have, and our solar panels should quickly boost us up to optimal amounts. Mystery goo, 3 science, what the heck. Well, actually no, because that's one that we can't redo once we do it. So we're going to leave our mystery goos and science juniors alone. Materials. Okay, so that's all the science that I feel like we can conduct right now. I don't believe it let us do barometer, temperature, or seismometer scans because we're too far away from any planet for it to work. Man, I love the coloring on this. I should play with lighting more often. Right, so the last thing I want to do with this craft is put it in the proper trajectory, and then we should be good to go. At that point, I would then set up the node to tell us when we need to do a burn to put ourselves into orbit, and then we should be done from there with this craft. So let's see. Yeah, look at that. Our Galileo station is on the move. There's the diver. It looks like it actually fell a little bit down there and maybe a little bit behind. I'm not sure. We may have to commit to a similar maneuver to get ourselves in the distance that we want to get to. I want to say about 1,000 kilometers or less. We'll cut to when we get there, because I'm sure you guys don't want to see me very carefully changing my nodes here. Nearly there. Almost. We've almost got it. Dip a little bit lower. And it looks like we're between 300 and 400. That's actually what I want. I looked it up, and apparently a safe orbit is between 200 and 500 kilometers. Like, you can go higher, obviously, but I believe if you dip below, like, 200, then you put yourself in a risky situation, because then the atmosphere starts to form up. So, given what I've learned, we should be in a safe orbit at this point, or a position to put ourselves in a safe orbit. So, now that the hard part is over, all we really need to do is wait until we get there, and then do an orbital procedure, a retrograde burn, when we get close to where we want to be in Jool, and then put ourselves in a stable orbit. There, I've got my lights back on. So what I would do is, I would decouple the station part. So right where my, let's see, it's a little bit easier to show you my highlights when I don't have the lights on. Right here, this node right here, I would decouple this location and allow everything below it here, all this, to float freely in a stable orbit around Jool, where it will conduct most of its science. And also serve as a potential space station in case we ever have a Kerbal eventually join it. Between the launch system up here and that decoupler is going to be our MapSat satellite. I will put it in a deliberately different orbit around the poles in the hopes that we can get some map information. If it turns out that we can't, then we might be able to get some more information from different parts of Jool, or if we're lucky, we'll be able to put it in an orbit around one of Jool's moons. As you can see, we still have plenty of fuel left, actually, so it might be possible to actually put this craft in an orbit around one of the moons and do a little bit of mapping there. I'll have to do some research online to see if it is actually feasible to do a MapSat map of Jool, and if it isn't, then I'll attempt to put it around one of the moons. So that's for the future, though. That's about as much as we can do for the time being. Let me just take a look at our orbital map once again. Stably put ourselves at about 350 kilometers to the surface of Jool, which is more or less exactly what I want. We'll have to be careful, though, because we're putting ourselves in a dangerous location. If we get too close, we'll fall in. And unlike our diver mission, right here, the Galileo diver, which is now gone on its own trajectory, we want the Galileo station and its MapSat satellite to survive. So we're going to have to be careful when we get close. I'm going to set up another alarm for the Galileo station. I want it to be at the SOI change, where it switches between between the sun's orbit and enters the sphere of influence around Jool, just like we did with the lander. And I'll have that set to go at about 5 minutes. So fortunately, already it looks like there's a little bit of a time difference between the two between the two parts. It looks like, based on our thrusting capabilities, the Galileo station is going to arrive about 5 days before the Galileo diver. And knowing this game, the further these two craft sail away from one another, the bigger that time difference will be. So as we get closer to Jool, we'll see that happen. But we're going to take a break from the Galileo mission, and instead focus on the Eve mission. So while this mission gradually flies over to Jool, we will go and begin a very serious, massive effort to get to Eve, and to put Kerbals there. So we'll see how that goes, and gradually I'll keep an eye on the Galileo missions, just to make sure they're on the right track as we go along. So, until then everyone, this is Ardwick, stay tuned, and good night.